So it's a morning, and Gabe and Michael and I are together. I haven't seen and heard Michael for a little while. It's probably been a month, Michael,
Yep.
maybe a
Yep.
little bit more. And Michael and I have been involved in conversation for probably 2 years or so. And Gabe and I, as you know, most people have been listening to the recent episodes, have been involved for the last, I don't know, it seems like a year now, Gabe.
More than that.
Has it been?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Feels
And
like an eternity.
good. I like that. You know, the idea of the eternal is kind of like the idea of forever, where you could wait forever and forever never seems to come, versus really thinking in terms that we're talking about, which is to see that as the present state of being and the present state of knowing and the present state of awareness that we all share as the source of life and our life, our existence. And to consider that allows the thinking we do that can easily become reactive and impulsive and compulsive as a result of the idea that we're defending our truth, our thoughts, our reality within the scope of thinking that what I think is reality and what I think is truth as a result. And then I become the creator of reality. And now I've created a self that I'm constantly trying to monitor and negotiate with and live with comfortably, while I can't ever seem to live up to the expectations it seems to have. While it's almost as though I'm a bystander to this thing I've created that seems to have dominance in my own experience, if that's clear.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the issues that Michael brought up today is, well, I'll let you repeat it,
Yeah.
Michael, because I think it was a
Well,
good
I mean,
start.
there's been conversations that I've obviously came in on Sundays, and there's times that I'm thinking, all right, how do we move forward? How do we get out of the behaviors similar to, someone who wants to stop drinking? Well, clearly you just stop doing it and start making other choices. But what will happen at times is when we're here, I'll hear conversations and I start to get very frustrated because I'm just identifying, all right, we've talked about this. Okay, we've done this before. Okay, you're mentioning the same thing you mentioned the last 2, 3 weeks, and then I start to get frustrated, like we're just going backwards, like taking 2 steps back before we can go forwards. And then I have a moment where I go, okay, well, just give it grace and allow that. Clearly I'm still frustrated. Clearly I'm struggling with something. And I have this odd, again, at that same moment, I'm like, yeah, but how long am I going to continue to allow this conversation to go on? Like, at what point do you identify, yes, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. I want to move forward. I can clearly identify that others may not be able or willing to do that, but there's this weird crossroad where, like, I don't want to continue to have the same conversation because I want to progress and I want to talk about what that progression looks like. And obviously it starts with me. And then it just gets very challenging to get yourself into that place while others are still causing so much noise.
Yeah. And part of the scope of this conversation, I've worked with people one on one as I did when we first talked, Michael. We spent time
Mhm.
together. Gabe and I spent time together. And doing it one on one is a very different experience than doing it with other people, because the one on one you can do what you're doing, I'm doing what I'm doing, and there's no other oversight, no other interruption, and no other interference going on. And part of the reason that this discussion became public and became something that I thought should be heard publicly is because most of the time during our day, we're in dynamics with many other people and many other circumstances going on than one person. That isolated time is actually sort of a luxury, like meditation is sort of a luxury, to sit quietly in an environment that's in quiet. And when you sit quietly in a quiet environment, it tends to create silence, quiet, calm you down, bring some peace. All those experiences happen. But if you are meditative in nature and facing challenges and thinking those challenges violate that peace, it misses the fact that our mentality is what becomes challenged, not our essence, not our being, not our awareness, not the ultimate aspect of who we are, in fact, not in thought.
Well, and I had I shouldn't say I had, I've been having a very, very difficult time, because when I went through sobriety 2019, and then 2020 clearly hit. 2020 was 22, all those years I was working remotely, so I was pretty much by myself. So I was really able to just sit with a lot of the things that I had been doing. And now I'm back in a work environment where I'm around a ton of personalities, as you just mentioned. One of them being was very, very challenging. That got resolved this past week. No person's no longer around, but I learned a ton about myself because I wanted to respond the same way I've always responded to things, but that didn't make sense to me anymore. And so my response was to just end it and move on, meaning myself, to stop the fight. But it went along, I know it went longer than it should have because of the fact that I almost fell back into the conflict. I fell back into the idea that there has to be this struggle every day, that is almost part of being. And I eventually got to a place where I didn't want to continue to be like that anymore. It wasn't beneficial, but I identified that it was a familiar place. Hence, it became something that I could just come accustomed to. But the day that person, that being, that element, that energy was no longer in that room, I felt this relief literally just climb off my shoulders. I felt lighter. I felt all these things you feel, or have felt before, when I just allow this negativity just leave my body. Except this was different because it was another person that was bringing that energy. And it was very eye-opening to understand, like, man, I've been in these positions multiple times throughout my life, and then I just begin to believe it's okay and it's normal, and it's absolutely not. It's, you don't have to have that burden you're carrying on your shoulders the same way you can just let them go.
Well, and to the earlier point about coming and having this conversation repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, my sense is that these topical tendencies we have to fix things on the surface because we figure out the circumstances, so the surface is operating better, and as a result we don't feel the grind, is to miss that the primary grind that we're facing is the thinking we're doing about what's happening, not what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
The primary nature of that thinking is what I'm doing all the time. It's never the other thing. It's never the other circumstances. And if I've gotten so accustomed to thinking that it's always them and always there and always somewhere other than where I am doing what I'm doing, and I'm fixing those things, thinking the remedy, like you talked about, just wanting to get it done. Well, okay, we've done this. How are we going to move on? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like being satisfied with one sort of liquor for a long time, and it becomes so normal it's no longer satisfying, and you jump to another one or another drug, and so because you want a different experience and think that the new experience is better. But if the essence of the thinking that we're doing isn't on notice, or we're not aware of, we're admittedly trying not to be aware of it, in my estimation, as being the central cause of that grind, we're kind of missing. What we're doing is fixing the exterior, and we're not looking at the cause. And one of the things that I have found was that I used to think, like you were saying, I want to stop it. 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 Stopping something means it started at some point, right? So in effect, within the realm of at least human endeavor, relative seeming endeavor, seems to always have a cause. And if I'm trying to treat the effect, that's effectively what addiction is. Because I tried to treat the effect before with alcohol and it didn't work. And I tried to use drugs and it didn't work. And I tried to use food and it didn't work. And I tried to use all sorts of other things that I thought more and more and more, or less and less and less. If I had less people that were like that in my life, I'd be better. If I had less people who were complaining, I'd be better. If I had less of this and more of that, I'd be better. But never what I have now. Always in this idea that it's somewhere else with someone else, a place I need to get to, I need to achieve, a thing I need to have in greater or lesser proportions. but never here. It's an indication in my experience that I'm actually looking at things backward because I'm thinking that what I'm thinking isn't the primary cause of what I'm seeing, but what I'm seeing is the primary cause of what I'm seeing. And our thinking is what drives the lens of our perception, how I choose to think of things. So if those things seem conflicted and I miss the potential to notice that they're telling me my thinking is conflicted, and I can draw it right back into my own experience immediately and say, oh, if I see them as conflicted, I must be thinking something conflicted. Then again, I've got everything reversed. And that's the whole basis of addiction, is that we think the wrong thing done more will turn it into right. And wrong by its nature is something that doesn't work. That's what makes it wrong. It doesn't function. It doesn't provide. It isn't beneficial. It isn't useful. It isn't whole. It's a piece of something that seems to be so distinct and so apart, just as I feel I am distinct and apart when I think the position I've taken is the only. This gets back to Gabe's last week. If you listened through last week's episode, Michael, Gabe's question was talking about how do I make a decision? How does something happen that seems to be like the only thing I don't want to have happen, and then all of a sudden my entire life and future seems to be doomed off this one little thought? I become twisted in my own thinking, and all of a sudden the world looks like a place filled with fraught and fear and problems and impossibilities and doom, rather than notice it's the thinking I'm doing that's doomed that I'm actually witnessing. It's the immediacy of that experience that I'm creating, because nobody and no thing impacts what I think more than how I think about those things. That's all being done in my brain, where all of my sensory perception and capacity lives. My pain and pleasure zones, all of the bodily functions are being managed by that brain. And if I'm undermining its ability to function because it's designed to process reality, I'm actually feeding it ideas that have nothing to do with reality and everything to do with what I think about reality, which is not reality. I'm at a deficit all the time, wondering why I need more, why I think I need more, why I need to do more, feel better, all that kind of stuff, rather than say, wow, if I'm creating this, that depression is in fact an indication of my clarity of what I am doing that is depressing. It's a weight I can't bear comfortably.
Bingo.
So, and that goes back to what we talked about last week, Gabe. That's why I thought today, I know that Mike, I made a reference, Michael, to staying focused on this other idea that we sort of picked up on last week, but you weren't there. So that you opened it up perfectly, but you didn't hear what we had talked about, which was that idea that something happened in Gabe's world that was the last thing, supposedly. I used to say it was the last thing. I realized it was the one thing I never wanted to have happen, not even the last thing. But it just triggered all these. Got a call from somebody about something he'd done years and years and years ago, and immediately had it blow up into thinking that it was just the end of everything. And I have those experiences every day when I can't find my keys immediately. And I'm immediately sure the car was stolen, and so
Was
I guess
it the end
that's
of
not.
everything?
Yes.
In a sense, yes, because that if the moment is always new, it means that everything that was happening is not is dead, essentially. That there's always a freshness to that
God,
newness.
I needed you guys today, man. I was like, I do not fucking feel right. How am I going to fix this? I'm like, oh, there's a meeting in like 6 hours.
So Anthony's over in France.
Yeah,
But-
show them the picture,
Yeah.
Anthony.
Okay.
So one of the things I want to ask is that we try to focus. This can easily get off into all kinds of other social directions. But everyone here today has spent some time in this conversation, every single one of us. Jen, I believe, was involved in Jen and Anthony. I know Anthony was. I think Jen was involved in at least the second or third conversation we ever had.
Yeah,
From the
almost 5 years. 4.5
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. So that thing you were talking about, Michael, of wanting to fix it. Sometimes the urge, my urge, is that I think I want to solve it immediately. And what I'm really saying is I don't want to solve it at all. What I want to do is create a quick fix, sort of a sugarcoating, a wishful thought that everything will be better if I feel better for 10 minutes. And yet what I'm really getting better at is denying this actual experience I'm having in its fullest, that's giving me all the details and information I need to actually solve it if there's anything I want to solve in it. But one of the other aspects of this is that the possibility to continue to do this thing, if we don't drink, we know we don't drink. To think that somehow we're never going to think a thought that's wrong and to not think it's right again is probably a little bit far reaching. If you follow me.
It's hard to do.
The basic reactivity is being caused by an idea that I'm maintaining a lie that has no place in reality. Its only existence is my focus on it. And if I focus on it so much that I think I no longer even feel it because it's come my reality, I have become numb to what I'm actually doing and wonder why the sensations that I'm withholding all of a sudden explode. To your point, Gabe, or to your circumstance.
Gabe's getting a lot of points today, I noticed.
Well, it started, I did a little reading this week on static electricity. And I don't know if you've had any experience with that, Gabe.
Every Sunday.
It's shocking.
Exactly. And you know how that charge builds up? Is that an insulated surface doesn't allow it to flow, so it builds up until it's released. Doesn't that sound a lot like the emotional situations we create?
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden a bystander who happens to say something at some point ends up being the recipient of all that energy that we've been storing. And we know once we're done that it's a little embarrassing that we just unloaded on this person 10 pounds when what they said was probably worth an ounce.
Yeah, it's
And
a lightning strike.
What's that?
It's a lightning strike is what that is.
Yeah. It's a buildup. And if we are denying what's happening in the name of thinking that if we deny it, that it isn't building up somewhere, that's just another fallacy we've created to make believe that that if I look to the right, what's happening on the left is no longer happening. And if I look to the left, what's on the right is no longer happening. And then I'm so clever, but that is a game of peekaboo. And I am now almost 69 years old, probably well beyond the point of playing peekaboo. And yet, to the degree I do that for the convenience of feeling better for a minute, that short-term satisfaction, I'm creating a long-term charge that's going to explode. But what happens is until it explodes, it's imploding on my own experience, which I would suggest is a good definition and metaphor for depression. There's an implosion going on. And what's happening is I'm becoming desensitized. I'm not really, but I'm thinking I am. So as a result, I'm creating effects that look like I am. Circumstances to make it look like it's everybody and everything else. We seem to have great clarity in what's wrong with other people in other places. We talk about it a lot. I mean, I listen to it a lot. I say it a lot. I talk about everybody in a sweet, nobody's going to do that. So I've just included everybody in the world in not doing something I'm probably not doing. Or I'm interested in doing.
I got to tell on myself too. Somebody told me that they didn't like something, and I heard them say that, and then I proceeded to do that exact thing. And then when they were mad, I was like, God, I wonder why they were so mad. I realized that they had told me that. I didn't even listen to what they said. I was so embarrassed. I still feel terrible. I fucking didn't even listen. I thought I would just change it. I'm like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about.
So, Michael, back to your point earlier about how do I get this to stop? To Anthony's issue is that when I'm maintaining obsessive thoughts, since addiction and lies are basic, addiction, lies, ego, past and future, all those things are basically the same thing. They're simply thoughts, things thought of.
Am I getting points right now?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Are you taking more than you probably got? Yes. if these things we're doing and thinking that we really believe are truth and reality, we become the creators of truth and reality. We become the creators of our own experience, while in fact we think we're the creators of our own existence. And that leap is really catastrophically difficult to ever make because it can't be made. And the feelings of less than and demoralization and incomprehensible demoralization the book talks about when we're drinking and drinking and drinking and thinking we can just stop it, and we keep fighting to stop it, but it never seems to happen as long as we fight it. We come to in the first step, the powerlessness is noticing it's the powerlessness over the lie. There is no power in a lie that we don't give it. So we have to imbue that, which is the induced insanity, to make believe that we can turn something that doesn't exist into all that exists. Because if I think that I can create reality in my thinking, all of a sudden I think I'm the creator of reality, and I fight for and defend my ideas as though my life depends on it. And other people who don't think like me are offensive because they're threatening my life. It isn't true.
Used to say, my friend in AA used to say, I liked him a lot. He used to say, that he was like a Hollywood stage, a Hollywood set. Like from the outside, it looks just great. It's perfect. But as soon as you walk past the door, you realize there's nothing behind it. Or like Baker's chocolate, where it looks like chocolate and it smells like chocolate. But that's the problem I'm having. Is like not knowing, just not even know. I hate that feeling of not knowing the problem. Usually if you know what the problem is, it's a great feeling, but just not really knowing where the problem is.
Well, if
the problems are not getting your way,
or too much, I don't know.
But think about this, though. Just put your pause button on, Anthony, for a second.
Well, just also, I realized too, I don't know where to start from, like the starting point. When I wake up and I look out, I have to reboot. Yeah.
Anthony, pause for a second.
Sorry.
If addiction is a lie, and a lie is the attempt to turn something that isn't true into true, think about this.
Yeah, that's the problem.
All of a sudden, the opposite always seems to be true. You said, I don't know. You know what that really means? You know, and you think you don't know.
Oh, yeah, maybe that's it. And I need to hide that. That's what it is. And I'm like, how the fuck do I get rid of these thoughts?
Hang tight.
How do I get rid of these thoughts?
Anthony?
Yeah.
You said that guy said what he said and you didn't hear it. What did you hear? The exact opposite. Just notice where this is coming from.
Yeah,
if I'm thinking a lie is true and I'm thinking I am only what I think, and the basic lie about my existence is untrue, most of what I'm hearing is only what I think is being said, and most of what I'm seeing is only what I think I'm seeing.
We could just go home now, right? That's it.
Well, hang tight. If you're coming to terms with this, when you think you don't know, since opposites are not opposite in the universe, they're actually connected, and that's why they attract.
I really do know.
Yes.
Wow.
And if you begin to notice that we're often acting on what we think is happening rather than what's happening, the distinction between I can think whatever I want about things. We are all free to think that, right? We seem to be able to think whatever we want. And if what I'm thinking is condemning me, why would I want to be condemned by what I think if I weren't thinking contemptful thoughts about what I'm thinking? Think about that. If you start taking the experience, and rather than think of it as something, Michael, to stop and get over and get away from, but say, this thing is telling me in the present moment where I always am. We're always in the present, always sensing what's going on, even when we don't think we're sensing it, because we've desensitized our thinking and our mentality. It isn't reality that changes, it's our mentality that changes.
I like that word, desensitized. Desensitized.
Yeah. Now, our bodies are sensational by nature. They feed input to the brain, and it's raw data. It's not an opinion. It's raw data about everything going on. And we are highly sensitive, and our sensations go well beyond the 5 senses we have, which is why people say he has a 6th sense. something beyond those five senses, meaning that there's a knowingness in our sensory capacity. If that knowingness is clear and we're simply misreading as though we're illiterate, as though we're reading a foreign language and keep getting it wrong, when we're misreading the depression we're experiencing and the conflict we're experiencing as something else other than what we're doing, we're disavowing any of the information it's providing us and dismissing it as though it has nothing to do with us. And then we think it has, now we think it's fighting us, happening to us. And when I start thinking it's happening to me, I know that I have completely abandoned in thinking, I have become irresponsible for that thing. Because now I think it has a life of its own. I've given it the life to begin with in my own thinking. Then I think I have nothing to do with it, so now it's attacking me. And then I think there's nothing I can do about it. And as a result, think there is absolutely no solution to it. And that's the impossibility of that cycle. Living that way, think of spiritual malady. The malady is not with the spirit, but what I think of it. Think of emotional sobriety. Emotional sobriety is about sane living. It's not about inducing insane thoughts and wondering why my living and experience, my life, my experience of life, starts to get wonky. Emotional sobriety isn't about never doing this again. It's about starting to notice what we're doing accurately. And when I know that I'm doing it, I know that I can absolutely stop anytime because I'm not interested in restarting it. Very different approach to the idea that I constantly need to stop it and get rid of it and get over it and get past it, all that other stuff. So if it's happening, I am starting it. And the consequences are the effects that I have created. In my experience only, in my mentality only, not in reality. If it has no place in reality, it will never be useful in reality, which is why we feel useless and hopeless. There's nothing we can do with something that has no place in reality that we invented in our brain. Wishful thinking, magical thinking, all that stuff is wishful and magical. We can wish all we want. If it has no place in reality, it has no place in reality. So it's never going to be convertible into some useful, beneficial product. So this can take a minute to digest. This food for thought that's actually digestible and nutritious, just like eating good food. If you go from eating junk all the time, it feels weird at first to eat vegetables. Takes
and
a
the
minute.
opposite.
Yes,
try
exactly.
and eat something funky after eating nothing but organic stuff you grew yourself for like a year and have somebody hand you a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's like freak city.
Yeah. Very good. So you can see how it plays back and forth, back and forth. Back and forth is the same thing. Forward and backward is the same thing. Up and down is the same thing. If it weren't for up, there would be no down. If it weren't for down, there would be no up. If we're trying to take positions as though they're exclusive to all other positions and missing the fact that if we have the freedom to take one position, we have the freedom to recognize all positions can also be taken by us or anyone else. Think of the difference. Am I offended? If I understand that, literally introduce to my understanding principles that are absolute principles, and now someone else takes a position that isn't my position, do you think I'll be ready to kill them or hate them or just say, wow, this is my position, that's your position. Why did you take that? What are you doing in that position? What are you going to do with that? It's a unification rather than a division, rather than a fight, rather than conflict. Because I'm seeing the reality of the situation is that everything is connected, all parts and pieces. In the absolute nature of the universe, the only thing that doesn't change is that everything changes. So when you consider everything, all of a sudden you start seeing the absolute. When you try to consider the parts and pieces, you start to think of them as somehow distinct from the whole, and that's impossible because they're absolutely a part of everything. That's always changing, and when you look at it all, it doesn't change at all. So the absolute actually reveals itself, just like noticing that everything that's happening is always happening. If I find myself upset because I don't expect things to happen, but I'm living with an understanding that, in fact, everything that's happening is always happening, when something happens, it's not always a surprise. Sometimes it is, but the surprise is muted by not having so much energy built up inside, waiting for that thing to happen, hoping that I can finally get rid of this load I've been carrying, this investment I've been making, literally in my lack of health, my illness. I'm trying to get rid of it by having it diffused finally, by being relieved of finally getting what I can't possibly ever get because it has nothing to do with reality. An investment in insanity, induced insanity.
That could be a book, an investment in insanity.
It's a moneymaker.
It's a bestseller. I'm in.
Well, historically, if you look at history, you see a lot of the divisive consequences coming out of this kind of thinking. People think their thoughts, their way, are the only way. As a result, anybody who doesn't live that way is basically treasonous and worthy of death.
Good to have you back, Jenna. I missed hearing you.
Well, I got
Yeah.
all Jack because Jack actually went to New York, and then I called him in New York at the butt crack of dawn, and he was all nice to me. And then somehow my pattern got skewed, and I don't know what happened. You know, I'm an addict. Things have to have a pattern to them, and I got a little bit off, and so now I'm back. I figured it out.
So
What
I
did
was
you
all
figure
nice
out?
to you compared to the stuff I generally dish out.
No, you were just so pleasant. Here you are on vacation and everything. I'm like, oh God, sorry to disturb you. And you're like, no way, I love you. Don't even worry about it.
No, listen, you guys have been central to the development of this conversation, which in my estimation is in fact exactly what Bill Wilson and the idea of addiction was getting at. Prior to
Where's
Alcoholics
Laura at? And
Anthony, don't
where's
do that. He was talking. You're just vying for attention. You've got our attention. We all know about
I
you.
was just wondering, I was looking at who's here from the original crew, and I was like, where's Laura
I'm going to get you a crossing guard, Anthony. If the essence of addiction is based in this mentality, this induced insanity, it doesn't mean we can't have traits that are difficult to overcome. But I would suspect if those traits are inherent to us, we're not struggling with those. They may not allow us to jump. You know, I'm 6'3". I can probably jump higher than somebody 5'2". It doesn't mean that person at 5'2", if they're delusional and constantly wishing they were 6'3", that would be a problem to them ever doing what they could with 5'2", right? If I'm
Right.
thinking about things that are already inherent, I don't tend to struggle with those things. They're just the way they are. If, in fact, because I hear people say, well, that's just the way I am. And okay, let's say that's true. Let's say people have traits that are unchangeable. But in fact, DNA is constantly adapting to its environment, constantly. So depending on how we interact with each other and interreact with each other, we are actually producing the next generation of DNA that is going to be replicated in those bodies that are yet to come. We're actually going to pass on bodies whose DNA have been affected by stress, that's completely induced by the body that's under stress, completely induced by the mind in that body. And my sense is that a lot of the breakdowns, the increase in allergies, the increase in all kinds of diseases are coming from the body not being able to make sense out of insanity. And that's actually a good sign. Because if our bodies can't process insanity, it's a pretty good indication that they are a clear indicator of what's right rather than simply something that's constantly feeling wrong, feeling bad, feeling hopeless, feeling all these other things. Those are things we're doing with the choices we can make, not the traits that are being caused that we don't think we can do anything about. Those are all coming out of this induced insanity, this imposed insanity. Book talks about it, self-imposed, self-induced. If the compulsions are coming off of this reactive, impulsive behavior, it's starting with what we're thinking and how we're thinking about what we're thinking. And to sit with that is a little daunting at first. My experience, anyhow. Doesn't have to be, I imagine, but it is. And my suspicion is as more people talk about this openly, it becomes a little easier. Just like in AA, you go into a room with 30 or 40 other people who have been through struggles and are talking about them in different ways and talking about how they have continued to stay sober in the face of the things that used to drive them out to drink or drug or whatever they did. It's very reassuring. Not always because of what they say, there's just a sense in the room that possibility actually exists. That things aren't impossible, that there are possibilities I'm not even thinking are possible because I get narrowed and addicted to the thoughts and I start to shrink. And I start to focus, like we were talking, Gabe, about that one instance, the one call immediately without ever getting a return call and finding out what it's about, immediately leads to, what did I do wrong? What's gone wrong? What are they going to do? This is it for me. And, another point too about that, Gabe, is that it isn't insane to think that when you were the one that had something to do with why they're calling, right? If they were calling you instead of calling you about a set of plans on a building that you never had anything to do with, probably wouldn't have had the same impact, right?
No, not at all.
So the point is that possibility doesn't mean probability. Within possibility, things are probable and they're improbable. It's a greater possibility, greater probability that if something went wrong, you might have had something to do with it, with something that you had something to do with. So when that call comes, it's not completely illogical that you might have a thought, what did I do? What did I do wrong? Because in the process of doing things, most of my experience, most of what I do is wrong. And what I'm asked to do is constantly, it doesn't always occur to me it's wrong until I see it doesn't work. And then what I'm asked is, how do I help it to work? How do I align with reality in the way that allows this thing to function? Right. So that means some things going along, many things, I would say, are right. I would never correct. I would never adjust. I would never learn if I absolutely operated perfectly in terms of reality all the time. If I was in perfect alignment with reality in terms of my actions. So here I am in perfect alignment with something that can't be imperfected, that absolute state of being. And it's my thinking that drives my actions, that drives those problems. If I'm wrong and I keep insisting I'm not wrong, I'm going to make that wrong so great as to live up to the potential, Gabe, that you thought of as doom.
It's going to be right someday, damn it.
Yeah. And my sense is all of those little things give us a chance to pop the bubble a little bit of that charge. We don't think, this idea that we're not doing what we're doing has us managing this inner charge that we think because we're managing it and pretending it isn't there and we're looking better, it isn't there, but it's growing the whole time. Because like any disease, if it's misdiagnosed and then mistreated, it's going to just continue to grow until, like a weed, it gets pulled out at the roots. And the pulling out for us, Michael, is the idea that we start seeing that we're actually doing it. And as you embrace that, and I mean really come to terms with that, and I say that really because there's a lot of ways we can say, oh, now I see that, and okay, that's all I need to see, and I'm done with that. I'm over that, but I keep suffering the same thing. Damn it, why? Why don't I know, like Anthony's saying? Why don't I know? Well, I'm not really looking at things honestly enough to really begin to realize how baked into my system I've done this thing to even not think I'm doing it. And in my experience, when I started realizing that most of what I was struggling with were the things I didn't even think I was doing, that was not only an aha moment, that was like an, oh shit, I got to go to the bathroom. Because that whole load that had been, my body was tense trying to maintain that stuff naturally, because it was illogical and preposterous to imagine that a thought that had no basis in reality could be maintained with any connection to health and comfort and ease. Undermines my whole chemical makeup. All of my chemicals go haywire in my body. They're trying the adrenaline, the dopamine, and the serotonin and all that stuff. I'm inducing all those. I'm trying to get rewards for being wrong all the time, trying to induce a dopamine hit to say I'm rewarded, so I must be okay, when what I'm doing is I'm reinforcing the wrong by an immediate gratification that's slowly being depleted to the point where I need it, I won't have it. And that is depressing. And I would say depression is an absolute clear, functionally literate experience that we're having. And when it's looked at accurately, you'll start saying, oh, I've been getting this, I've had the signs and the alarms all along. I haven't been listening and following them. No wonder I feel lost. No wonder I feel like I don't know where to go. I haven't been listening. I've been hearing what I thought I was hearing, which meant run like hell, get away. And in mental conditions, when you run, they come. They do not stay behind. You run with them, they go with you. So all the effort is useless because you end up exactly where you started.
I'd like to know what Michael thinks of this. Are we being repetitive again? Are these the same ideas? Did anything help?
I was gonna say yes and no, but yeah, it's just yes and no. It's obviously I do hear. I mean, I think I listen well, so I hear a lot of what Jack says, and I also acknowledge that just as the repetition that I'll play, it needs to be as repeated as much as it needs to in the opposite direction. And I guess the best way I'll explain that is since I stopped drinking, I started to notice that I feel like a child.
Yep.
Like my emotional intelligence, I'm kind of learning, gauging that. So like right now I'm like 5. When it comes to just the stuff that I thought I knew, the way I thought I would approach it, I'm very open to just understanding that I can easily be wrong and that's okay. And that took a long time to get there. That took very long. I didn't want to be wrong. I don't want to be wrong. I want to be stupid. I'm stupid, this and that, all these things. But I've just gotten to a point now where if I'm wrong, it's okay. There's obviously multiple ways that things can play out. And as much as certain things can be repeated, it's just identifying and being open to other paths. Like where's the opportunity, I guess? Where's the opportunity to do something differently or just grow from?
All right, let's talk about that then. Because I would say that we're not going to leave any of the potential of these problems behind, because if everything is always possible, there's a good possibility we're going to repeat this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But beginning to notice, oh, I know what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. And start to actually, that's what I tend to do. People ask me, well, you act as though you don't ever do this. And I said, no. I don't act like I don't do it. I'm talking very clearly about the fact that I'm largely every day making wrong decisions. What I notice is when I think I'm right, I have that immediate contempt. I'm starting to look for a donkey to pin a tail on somewhere in my vicinity. Immediately. I'm looking for a fight. Why? Because I want to blame somebody. I don't want to take if I'm acting irresponsibly, I don't want to take responsibility. And you know what? I'm responsible. It's interesting. You can't be irresponsible to be responsible, but you can be responsible to be irresponsible. Irresponsibility will because it's an induced state, like we were talking earlier about ego and about past and future, and all those things are thoughts. Maybe in some subatomic level that history is always there. I don't know. Maybe the future is already spelled out. Maybe it's already determined. I would think if that were the case, that we wouldn't have this capacity to think what we want and self-determine what we conclude. But I haven't looked at that long enough and experienced it long enough. I think I have a pretty good suspicion of it, but I'm open. I want to be open. I want to continue to grow.
I got a quick question. Somebody just texted me that they didn't get paid on a job. They got fired, and they want to know if they could borrow some money.
Anthony?
Yeah. Let's
deal with what Michael was talking about.
Okay, sorry.
Because it's often I get into a direction, and then I don't always have perfect recall and focus after the years of trying to make believe I knew everything.
Michael's got it all figured out. He knows exactly what to do now.
That makes one of us, my friend.
But that's your baby.
But to a point there, Anthony, you're right. If we know, we know. Yeah. We may not think we know, and as a result,
we don't want to do it, or we don't want
It's
to
the
do it.
it's the thinking we're struggling with. It's not the knowing. So a couple of weeks ago,
And
Michael,
I need to stop you there because that's like that is. I wish I could remember that. It's the thinking, not the knowing, because I sit and I sit
Yeah.
and I sit and I think and I think and I think, and eventually I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I just need to
Just
knock it
call me.
off.
I'll remind you. I'll just call me. I'll remind you.
Yeah.
well, think of
It's
the word
definitely the
remind.
thinking.
Think of the word remind and remember. It's as though we're dismembered by our thinking when in fact our knowing is absolute and can't be in parts and pieces.
Oh, well,
So
he
part
knows
of
what to do. He knows what to
but
do.
part
He's just trying to get airtime.
part part of the transition here is introducing to our understanding reality. We're actually beings. It's like we've been put in a cockpit of an airplane and we're at 30,000 feet and nothing's gone wrong yet to prove we really don't know how to fly the plane. That doesn't mean we're safe. It means the inevitable crash is coming.
That's funny.
And to your point, Michael, about where to go and what to do, to begin to notice that if there's an absolute state of being in the universe, if there's an infinite nature at all, it must be our nature, because it seems to be nature's nature. It doesn't seem to be arguing about what it's doing. You cut a tree down, it continues to grow. You cut the lawn, it comes back. It doesn't argue, it doesn't get pissed off, it doesn't get upset, it doesn't leave the neighborhood. It continues, constantly processing, constantly offering itself, constantly replicating. We don't do that. We are the only species ever to have potentially developed weapons that could destroy us as a species. All coming out of the idea that we need to protect ourselves from each other, when in fact it's the protection from this seeming self that we've been running from and hiding from and making believe we aren't a part of. We've been thinking is our source so long. We think our ego is in fact God. We pray to it. We pray to our thoughts to try to get better, try to stop certain things. We're not praying to God. We're praying to our ideas about God, our thoughts about God. Whatever that God is does not need, if it's already given us everything, it isn't everything we're asking for, and it's nothing we're asking for. It's why do we keep doing the same thing within our thinking and think that somehow everything should go right and everything should be fine? That's the question we don't tend to ask. We think God doesn't respond. God doesn't listen. God hates me because I didn't behave. Think of how petty God would have to be to create all of this and then sit there with his hands on his hips as though he's a he with hips, looking and saying, oh, these guys just don't know how to behave. They're just such a bunch of shitty little kids. We think of it in human terms. We don't think of, we have despirited our humanity and humanized God. Made God seem to be, which is what ego is. It's this whole idea of ego. So if there's a getting past, it's coming in the form of recognize that we've never been out of whack as an essence, as that knowing nature. That knowing isn't in thinking, Michael. It's in an absolute state of present being, which is peace, quiet, stillness. Always, always ever present. It's an absolute meditative state of awareness that if it exists, and it seems to in the universe, because everything seems to know exactly what it's doing, and it isn't, most of the things that are doing anything aren't thinking. So there seems to be a knowing that's inherent to this experience we're having. And to think we don't have it is very interesting, that somehow everything everywhere has it but us. We've just been left as a bunch of morons on a planet constantly struggling for water and food and some better place to look better. Some better place to live, to have it all look better. Seems a little man-made, human-made. If we have an essence, we know it. It's exactly why we suffer. So getting back to this point earlier about repeating it, when you start reading the language of what's happening is not something to stop, but something to thank. The pitiful nature of our contempt, the pitiful nature of our depression, the pitiful nature of all that stuff is pitiful because it has no basis. It's pitiful to take everything that we have. If there's an infinite source, we all have it. We're all part of it, sharing it equally, because there is no division in it. There's no inequity in it. It's indivisible. We're sharing it collectively and acting as though we each need more. The idea that I need to think I need more is the idea that I don't have it all. What am I doing? I'm reinforcing a lie that isn't true. What do I feel? Less than, out of sorts, out of place, always need to get somewhere with something else or less of something else all the time, driven to finally get there. Where am I going if I'm not where I am? How can I get there if I'm constantly not starting on an actual foot of sanity where I am? It isn't where I get, it's where I be. It's where I am. It's this now, our conversation now, our ability to actually seemingly penetrate that veil and realize that we've always known. We've just been acting like we didn't know so we could support the contention that the thoughts we made up that we thought were us are true. That fight you described, Michael, constantly fighting to be right all the time. That isn't an accident. And if we see other people do this, we think, oh yeah, that's all I can do. That's all they do. So that's all I can do. And I'm just as screwed as they are. And seeing it that way shows how unity actually comes through. What's interesting also, worthy of note, is that the disturbing nature, you recognize the disturbance, right, Michael?
Definitely.
Yeah. So now wouldn't assurance generally be assuring? When in fact that assurance isn't assuring at all. It's demoralizing. It's humbling. It's humiliating. Why? It's wrong. We know it. We wouldn't feel those things if we didn't know it. Our own system, our own bodily system is giving us correct information, and we're seeing it as something to deny and fight and get over again because we're married to this thinking about the thinking being reality and truth. So that same, as long as we do that, you can notice, oh, I'm fighting it again. I'm trying to make it better. I'm trying to fix it. I'm trying to, rather than notice I'm the one breaking it constantly and then the one that seems to be coming in to fix. I'm like a plumber who goes in, breaks it, leaves, comes back and gets, he thinks he's got a full-time job now. He's got a career. One faucet. Over and over
Yeah.
and over and over and over and over and over again. To the point like getting a massage. Somebody rubbed one part of your neck for 3 hours, you'd be numb. You wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't be helping anymore. You wouldn't know if it hurt or anything else. You'd be completely desensitized. We're doing it in our experience and thinking we have nothing to do with it and starting to look over the edge of that thought and start to notice that everything begins at the end of these thoughts we thought were the end of everything. They don't end at all. They're the beginning of everything else. And they always have been, and all they've been is little bubbles of delusion, thinking a little thought that we're, blowing into the air with hot air, just like bubbles will never pop the longer we maintain them and make sure that they just don't get near the earth and they're constantly up there floating. We're keeping them going in our thinking. And it is depressing as hell, because I imagine that's the whole concept of hell came out of this kind of thinking. That there's some place we'll end up rather than start to admit the place we're creating right here is actually a living hell to the degree we make believe that all we are is what we think.
Yeah, but those little bubbles of illusion are familiar to us. And so when they're gone, when we hit a state of neutrality, for me, I try to conjure them back up.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was talking about. It's not comfortable to have nothing.
But
it is.
Keep in mind, the ability to conjure them up is at least the ability to notice you're the one doing it.
No, of course.
And
sometimes I laugh at myself. I go, what the fuck? Why are you doing that? Because it's just like this underlying familiarity of angst or something. And I'm like, I don't even need that. I created it. Now I have to get rid of it when it's all just an illusion.
Well, in that vein, I would suggest, Jana, that you're also confronting something else. You've eliminated one thought, but another one is telling you now that was buried under the other bubble. Like, the bubbles in a bath.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Right? You're only seeing the ones on the top for the most part. There's hundreds of them beneath the top. There's some sitting right on the water, right?
Yeah.
So as the top ones pop, you start seeing the other ones. So this conversation, if we're having it in the essence of it, is to start to notice that we're the bathtub. We're not the bubbles in it. The bubbles wouldn't have a place to be if there weren't a bathtub.
I like the champagne analogy better, personally.
So we can, if the basic thought we have about thinking is reality and truth, everything we think about from that point is contaminated with that idea. So all these little bubbles we create, trying to make believe that if one of them comes true, the rest will come true, aren't necessary to go back and pop individually, to pop them all by simply noticing it's one single thought that we can be apart from, this absolute knowing nature, that we can be distinguished or distinct from it, is the idea that we have greater power than it. That's the primary lie. If I'm having that thought, and I would suspect humanity has had that thought for a long time, if I'm having that thought, every subsequent thought is going to be polluted and contaminated and corrupt from that single thought. So if I'm trying to figure all the other thoughts out, rather than begin to start to settle in and say, oh, it's really all those other multiples of thoughts have all come out of trying to divide one thought in half and half and half and half and half. And the fractured state of thinking, the fractured mental state, is trying to turn all those fractions into something when they are fractions of nothing to begin with. They're all just ideas, thought, feeding
Illusion.
thought. Yeah. Thoughts are imagined. When you think of something, it generally comes with a picture. The longer you think of it, it generally turns into a story, just like a movie. It's a projection.
Doesn't this happen, Jack, with the good things in life then too? When it's going my way, aren't those just imagined thoughts as well?
Ah,
Well, the going your way is imagined because you think if it goes your way, you're proving those thoughts are true, rather than start to see the way it goes is in fact your way. Not how you think it should, but how it, if everything is going how it's going right now and happening how it's happening, that's in fact your way and my way and our way.
But
To
to
think of it
Michael's
as
point, that colleague that's no longer with him, that's a positive. That's a going my way. Everything's a little bit better and a little more relaxed.
exactly. But
But
we're
as
addicted to those ideas because we think if we can make our ultimate suffering a little more comfortable, we're better off, rather than say, why am I constantly, I listened to this guy who is trying to, Tony Robbins set him up. He's an Indian guy, and I'll send you guys the link, but he was one of Google's original founders, made a fortune, talked about how insufficient, he bought 2 Rolls Royces online once that got shipped to him. And he said, it took 7 minutes before I thought, I could have had a different color. I should have had a different color. Right?
Well,
So he interviewed,
go
he
ahead.
has a podcast, and he interviewed the happiest man alive. And he said, so you're always happy. He said, you never feel rage. He said, no. I feel rage all the time. I'm upset all the time. He said, it's what I do with it that makes a difference. In our discussion, my question is, why do we commit to the rage and doing something about it when we're the ones perpetuating the rage? We're doing something about it by maintaining it rather than noticing. When I start to allow things to be what they are and do what they do, I start noticing there are benefits so far beyond what I perceived I would get by having things go my way. Because now the potential of possibility is really fully potential. The realization of that potential is starting to be realized. And all of a sudden, things that I never thought would happen start happening. And I can't even believe I never considered those things could happen. And all of a sudden have a sense of gratefulness and appreciation and joy and satisfaction, not because I created it, but because I finally got off the dime that was inhibiting it. I was mentally blocking it, thinking that blocking of it was in fact my power, my control. And it was actually disallowing me to actually witness in my physical form what was happening accurately because of this delusion of reactive and sort of connived, constant manufacturing up, coming up with the right thing to do in the right way to get the right thing I needed, all that stuff. So the potential challenges are still challenges, but the difference is when you're clear about having a knowing nature, the challenge becomes noticing how quickly you can notice something's wrong and adjust to what's right. You're not fighting all the time against trying to stop the wrong thought that you keep fighting for is right, because that just starts to dissipate. You realize that's a lost leader. That's not going anywhere. It's never going to happen. It's something that you thought would happen because it was proving you were in control of reality and truth. Now, all of a sudden, challenges become intuitive, and all of a sudden, we start knowing better how to do things the same way people figured out how to put seeds in ground and put water in them, and that beans and rice were a natural protein. Think of that. How was that figured out before Gold's Gym? Thousands of years ago, they have been mixing beans and rice as a natural protein. We know more than we think. Our primary nature is knowing and awareness. That's our nature. To think constantly about our thinking gives us the impression that something's wrong. Why wouldn't we use that impression and say, of course something's wrong? Thinking about my thinking exclusively is giving me the impression I don't know anymore. And you said it earlier, I don't know. We know we're lying about not knowing. We do know. We might not think we know, but not thinking we know simply means we're not thinking about reality properly, because we've thought that we were the creators of reality. Why wouldn't we turn our back on all of the things that might prove us wrong? And then wonder why it's so difficult, why we're so, unable to be abundant in our business life, and it's so hard to make a deal.
And the emotional pain, Jack, is the acknowledgement of not knowing, that we think we don't know.
Exactly. Better said, yes.
That's
but you
hard
see,
to...
you corrected it, though, not knowing to thinking we don't know.
Yeah.
Starting to notice that a knowing nature isn't thinking at all. It has nothing to think about. What would it need to think about if it knows everything?
Sorry, Michael maybe wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, back to your comment, Gabe, about like relieving and feeling good. Part of me doesn't. I'm like, I should just quit and move to the south of France and hang out with Anthony.
In a way, in a very clear way, you're actually admitting that the reliance you've had is hopeless and fruitless and worthless and valueless, and is never going to figure it out. You're never going to use it to figure it out. And as you get honest about that, you'll notice my experience very clearly, and with other people I've worked with, and I think sobriety in general. When any concession is made that's accurate, awareness and intuition immediately becomes obvious. Because all we've been doing by trying to think we're the creators of truth and reality is we've been busy trying to make it right while it was wrong. And that's to think that our back was turned on reality, when in fact it never left, it never minimized, it never grew, because it's not a function of size and space. It's a non-time space essence. So that feeling is actually an accurate assessment of the thinking that you're doing. And as you start to put that together, my experience was I got sick. The nausea in my stomach became obvious to me. And I started noticing that I'd been creating an acidic condition in my body that was out of whack. My pH balance, all that stuff was out of whack, because I was constantly inducing fear in my system, because I knew better while I was doing wrong, thinking I wasn't. And what would come out of that but fear in the body saying, man, you are taking me down a road I cannot sustain. But I'm going to go with you. I'm at your disposal. I'll do what you say. I'll do what you ask. And our bodies are unbelievably durable given the amount of stress and anxiety that we heap on them. So health is natural and the growth is natural. And a few weeks ago, Anthony said, for all you do, Anthony, to reinforce the thinking you do, you said something to the effect, I think it was 2 or 3 episodes ago, you said, what if it was perfect? What if it was absolute? You thought everything would be perfect. You said everything would be perfect. Everything would be fine. And you had a list of words that you used almost immediately to sort of confirm that came to your head. And then you immediately launched back at what, but it isn't.
I kind of remember that.
Huh?
I kind of remember that. We're not really.
I called you afterward because this isn't about agreement. It's not about, what's interesting is we've had all the faith we could possibly muster in thoughts that were worthless and useless, and it never worked. We've had all the belief, we've had all the hope. It's never
Oh
worked.
yeah. I always want
Because we
something
can't,
different. Like, but what if it all worked out for a reason? What if it was all supposed to be exactly the way it is, right? Is
I
that
don't
what it
remember
was?
exactly what I
Yeah.
thought you said something more like, what if it was absolute? What if it was perfect? What if, and then you had, all of a sudden you had a bunch of words line up that would reflect that kind of thinking. So my
Yeah.
point is right now that for all the faith we had and all the belief we had and all the hope we had and all the seeming agreement we had from everybody else, like Janet talks about the co-conspirators, none of it worked. It just perpetuated the same mythology. And we maybe eked out a few things to say, yeah, well, look at what I did. Yeah, look at what I did. But the question is, what are we all doing? Is the world getting better from the little bit you're doing to look better? And the natural process is so natural that as you just begin to consider truth and reality, and just let it float. Don't make a decision. What's interesting, my experience is I was addicted to decision making. I was addicted to not just choosing, but then deciding that was the only choice. And as a result of that choice, I was going to be hamstrung by that thing as long as I went, because now it identified me. It was me. That's just me. What are you talking about? That's just how I am. Damn it. And what it is a thought that I've made into my reality that I'm fighting desperately to keep going. And I'm offended by anybody else who doesn't think like I do. So those are all where belief and all that stuff. Reality has never needed belief whatsoever to be real. It's been real the whole time. Regardless, trees don't have belief in it. They just act in accordance with it. Plants don't need it. Molecules don't agree with it. They don't think about it. They just know, and they do. According to their design, they do. According to what they can do, they do. My ideas about concluding things and coming to these resolutions in my mind, the reason they're resolutions is because I was constantly having to resolve them because I was constantly recreating the problem. So consideration isn't decision making at all. It's simply allowing an idea to float. And if you're considering an idea that's actually true, you'll notice that you will start operating on that basis because your body already knows it. It's built by it. It's the product of it. And that's what intuition is. Intuition, by definition, is knowledge beyond reason in a simple form. There's no excuse, no reason for it at all. You just know you know. If we've always known we've known because it isn't something we can void, we can only think we did, then thinking again is shown to be the culprit. And it isn't thinking, it's my use of thinking and my misuse of thinking. By making believe that my thought is who I am, I'm mistaking my thought and end up with misgivings naturally. And it's literally ID fraud in the sense that I'm trying to associate who I am with that thought, but the thought is fraudulent. So I'm constantly perpetuating this imposter, this syndrome, this imposter syndrome, never feeling, no matter how much I do, I never feel right. I never feel good. It's interesting. You can want something forever and get it and realize you don't want it. Why? Because the want wasn't in the thing you were trying to get. It was in the fantasy that someday something will be different, but today I'm not going to do anything different at all. I'm going to do the same old thing. That's the sickness. Nothing I can do at all. But when I get there, a place that doesn't even exist, and there is always present. So when you get there, of course, you're going to get there and say, well, this ain't it. Because now that I'm present in that moment, I thought sort of was intoxicated by this idea that I could get to this moment, that I was consumed with it, that when that moment came, something would be different because I'd be in that other place I imagined I would be. I'm not realizing that I'm in the present, imagining that moment that never comes because it's always present. It's what I'm doing in the present that I'm not doing correctly, honestly, to create this idea that it'll be somewhere else with someone else and some more or less of something else. It's never enough because there isn't anything you can do to add to something that doesn't exist to ever make it reality.
Don't you think your day would be more productive is right when you woke up, you meditated for like 15 minutes and you just calmed yourself?
Well, let's look at the opposite of that. That means you've just had a good night's sleep and your eyes open and you're immediately under stress. My question is, no wonder we need so much sleep. It's the one
But
time
it's
I
just
can
funny,
think I'm
like
really avoiding things.
it seems like that would be good for you, but it's like I could never just wake up and start meditating. I want to start thinking about what I need to do and what's right and what's wrong. I just
That
need the
knowingness,
launching.
Anthony, that knowingness, that awareness that we're talking about, is it's absolute, is a meditative state of awareness. It is a pure consciousness. Pure meaning, one of the absolutes that the Oxford group was founded on was purity, honesty, unselfishness, and love. Right? If that essence is in fact an absolute state of consciousness, that's what meditation effectively is.
Yeah.
Why is it when we meditate, we see something peaceful and then we go into our world to think that peace isn't coming with us? We think of it as distinct because we rely so heavily on our thinking to give us those effects. We think those effects with the bad thinking we do should always be obvious, when in fact our body is largely designed to give us information about how we're thinking about what's happening. Our spirit isn't designed to be affected by that.
Yeah, but instead of being in a meditative state, it's like, okay, breakfast time. All right, what am I going to eat? I got to make sure it's healthy. Oh, that's not good. I'm going to, there's all those thoughts. Am I eating this too much? And then got to have coffee. I need something to make my brain. Oh, without coffee, I just don't feel right. Now I got to change that mode with the coffee. Then I got to make
So
sure everything's going right.
would you say that's a thinking process or a being process?
Thinking. I think a lot when I'm doing that. I really should be eating better. Why am I eating this? Is this filling me up? I
So
just
Anthony,
analyze.
obsessive thinking is the idea that the more we think, the closer we'll get to being true and solve the problem. What are we doing actually? Because the opposite's always true. In a lie, the actual opposite of what we think is true. A lie is a lie. What does that end up with? The lie as a lie is true. The lie as truth is a lie. Thing you're feeling, if you think of the opposite of the thing you're feeling, you'll start seeing.
I want to feel great about something. Like the first thought I start thinking, I'm like, what can I feel great about? That's the first thought I go through my head. What is there to be really grateful? What am I doing that's incredible? So that's starting off the day, getting ready for some hours. I'm thinking about it, right? It's how is your day going to be incredible?
Well, the day is incredible, and what you think about it is not. So that's the issue.
I like that. You look like you're losing weight, buddy.
Can you see me?
Yeah, maybe it's the new glasses.
Or did I put a picture of somebody else up?
Yeah, so that's the
Anyway,
problem. I set myself up for I just set it up for the beginning. Like everything could be great. Just wake up. And I start thinking
Anthony, if you rely on your thinking, it's like relying on your right foot to walk all the time. Just decide for a day, just decide you're going to walk everywhere on your right foot, not your left foot, and see how that goes. See if that brings that great feeling that you're talking about. And that's what you're doing with thinking. We can normally have a conversation about these, I would say, elevated reality as something far superior to thinking, and end up right back where we started by thinking about the thinking again, trying to solve the thinking. As long as you do that, you're going to create the problem you think is solved in thinking, and that's the cycle of addictive thinking. That's exactly what we're talking about. You're welcome to do it, you're free to do it, but you are earning those consequences that you experience that aren't that great.
By just thinking about things? Like
just thinking about your thinking as though that's the solution. Rather than starting to know that you have a knowing sense and live with that, literally consider that thought, don't conclude that you do, so that you can then conclude that you don't. Just live with it.
Or just go when you wake up, I sure hope all my problems just work themselves out today. I sure hope everything just takes care of itself.
Anthony,
if
reality is reality and that does not change, The reason that we can consider it without concluding anything about it is because it already exists. It isn't up to thinking. Thinking was created by it. Thinking is a byproduct of it. Thinking is something we do. It isn't something we are. Now, it takes a
It's like we
second.
keep saying the same thing over and over.
Yeah, exactly.
This could be like our this could be our preamble.
If
I
there's an
promise not to.
absolute source, it's absolute no matter what we
Yeah.
think. We've never obstructed it. What we have obstructed is our mentality.
That's what I was telling Mike. Yeah. When I was saying
Anybody
he knows
else?
what to do.
Any other
I was
comments?
just he knows what to do.
Any progress?
Yeah, everything went my way this week, so I'm good.
Yes.
That's the spirit. So until next time, consider that if there's an absolute source, the big book talks about it, absolute, infinite, unlimited, omnipotent, all powerful. If that in fact exists, it's the nature of existence. That's the nature of our existence. If that is true, it is also real. If truth and reality are absolute, we cannot talk our way in or out of it, but we can neither be condemned by it because it is everything that exists. And if that isn't enough, your thinking is never going to find enough as enough. It's impossible. And that's
let's
the
hear about this
impossibility of addiction.
Let's hear about this cute little baby Michael has. What's it doing?
Huh?
What's your little baby up to?
I don't have any kids.
Oh, I thought you did. Who has the kid that?
I have a kid.
Oh yeah, how's your kid?
She is a goat.
She's pretty magnificent. She's GM of one of the biggest 4-star restaurants on Maui. She just got a promotion like a week ago. She's a little stressed,
Wow.
but she's doing great. She's growing up.
That's awesome.
Highly store. She's the GM, and Mick Fleetwood goes in there every Friday night for dinner, and they chat.
Wow. That's great. Oh, this was a great meeting.
Well, listen, I love you guys. I love that we do this. I am interested in continuing and developing it and also focusing and starting to flush out some of the things that might seem trite and ridiculous. But I would say if you feel that it's ridiculous, it may be part of that built-in inherent reactiveness coming up with an excuse to dismiss it so you can continue to go on thinking your thinking's going to solve it. Worth considering.
Yep. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
Thank
sense.
you.
Thanks, you guys.
Hey,
Mahalo.
Diana.
Thanks.
Michael.
Hello.
I will,
Aloha
Jack.
Nui.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Love you guys.
Love
Love
you.
you
you too,
more.
buddy.
Bye.
Aloha. Thank you, Jack.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Good to hear you and see you, Jenna.
You too. Aloha.
Bye.